All right, today's June 28th, 2024. This is Synergetics Livestream number 19.1. In this Synergetics stream, it's going to start off and be a bit different. I'm going to begin with an email from Maurice Kaler from 5 hours ago in our Trim Tab book club. Maurice writes, "Greetings, fellow Trim Trappers. Daniel and I had a breakneck and purposeful day yesterday. We were in the library from around 10:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and got through most of the boxes, sending some photos later today. We also had some lovely conversations with the librarians about the collection's popularity, their experiences with those who visit, and the curse of the collection itself is in its size. It would be a massive financial undertaking to digitize everything. Librarians said that the Whitney Collection book and My Private Sky are the best books out there regarding his body of work. Daniel will hopefully be posting the images within the week. There is a little there for everyone. Jazzed at the Drop City / Steve Bear letters we got. What didn't happen? We did not get to see Bucky's glasses or stethoscope as they did not pull. My glasses will have to do for now." So these are Maurice's glasses. "Neither did we see the correspondence letter between Bucky and Carl Jung. What did happen? Many photographs of stockade buildings. Photographs of shelter, covers, and content. Lots of letters including McLuhan, John Huston, Marlene Dietrich, letters between Bucky and Anne, letters written to Bucky by children and admirers. Photos of intuition and Bucky sailing with his family around 1970. The silhouette is one of my favorites. More to come." So that was Maurice's email. And I was already working on processing and reflecting from yesterday's trip. And so I just started writing, and I wanted to get it out there and just finish it before the end of the week and get it to a stopping point. And then that turned into just a lot of learning and fun. So here I have written, "Thank you, Maurice, for the invitation and experience. Here's where I made my day after write-up, that's today, of our visit to Fuller's Chronofile, including pictures that are not of the materials directly," which is what the rest of this live stream is basically going to be going through. Now, I am reading it as Synergetics Livestream number 019.1 because of the auspicious timing and possibility of serious fun learning in reflecting. Anyone who wants to help or has insights, I would look forward to it. Post the email. View the message. Reload the page. There we go. 4:03 p.m. Pacific. So now for the rest of the live stream, I'm basically going to go over this document that I prepared, just this first version of, to provide some close after fun takes and openings and connections, and just kind of almost totally, though not finally, reflect on that visit. And at the end, we can get to next steps and materials of the direct accessibility. So here's a Coda page that's in the video description for YouTube. All right. Maurice K. and Daniel F. went to Stanford to visit the Bucky Fuller archives. That's this page. And here was the email that we modified the time chain on. Callback. Here are the materials that Maurice requested. Thank you to Maurice for making this happen and inviting me. This is a DOCX file with what Maurice requested, which was apparently not arduous. But thank you very much, Maurice, for making it happen and for coming up from Southern California. Okay, so overall, initially, that's the 28th today, day after, and briefly, as a forward to the photos below, here's some things I'll say. There's a lot to continue and learn and do in this area, as Maurice's email alludes to, beyond, for the newer as well as older Fuller / Synergetics interested of many backgrounds. Personally, I found the experience to be quite awesome and a bundle. So in that way and others, it was an experience that I found to condense / summarize / reflect many other experiences, including at slower scales. There are many ways to look at it. Certainly, though, the materiality of the archive/Chronofile, whether you visit it or not, as we did, forces and sharpens the question or understanding of what is, quote, Fuller the man, the physical, what he would refer to, embodied, with synergetics and all these other topics, which, again, with Fuller's ontology, could be considered metaphysical. All right, on the archival or knowledge engineering perspectives, just on visiting this Stanford collection, just first takes, just as with everything, take it with just this timeliness. There are about 2,400 items in the collection, which is not held on Stanford campus. Many of the items are the 6-inch length box, which are requested by people like Maurice, picture below. There are also map-sized documents, pictures below, and there are a number of irregular objects like spectacles and a stethoscope, objects that we did not receive or see. Towards the end of the day, we also had a longer conversation with the staff, touching on many topics like archiving, digitization, accessibility, and also some of their memories of prior guests, which also, as Maurice alluded to, it was funny and interesting. Some more on that later. Only a small fraction of the Chronofile are digitized. It goes without saying, and just needs doing, though not necessarily every doing needs being done, that improved digitization would be part of an increase in the accessibility, meaning utility and relevance of the collection, Bucky Fuller, applications of Synergetics, everything. Okay, more on this later. From a Synergetics and connections with Synergetics perspective, there's also a ton to say. So the correspondences, Dully, John Cage, Marshall McLuhan, U.S. Department of Defense and the Navy, family, strangers reaching out, are very incredible, often simply in their plainness, and also incredible in their semantic connections and associations. So, for example, there was a letter and discourse where the writer was explicitly describing their connections with Fuller's work and the American pragmatists like Pierce, Dewey, and James. So that would just be like one tiny little entity-based thread to explore. As Maurice mentioned, the material on boats, the boat intuition, which he was very happy and excited about, stockade buildings, a lot of those materials, hilarious advertising, bills, contracts, stock agreements, and also just on architecture, including the Shelter magazine and the T-Square before it, were very interesting. There were illuminating contrasts between the two eras that we sampled, which were just about 11 boxes or somewhere around there. So, tiny sample, coming mainly from the 1930s, plus or minus a few years, 27 to 32, and the late 1960s, in terms of also the collective differences and the technology of writing in the late 20s and in the late 60s. So that's pretty interesting from a Synergetics archaeology or ethnographic perspective. Add that one to the dictionary. So continuing below are photographs and some captions and descriptions that are just kind of fun and interesting. The comedy of the moment is continued with the photo, and also just right up. Okay. So visiting Stanford. Here's look on the bench on the south side of Green Library, Hoover Tower / Institute, in between the library and the Hoover Tower. You'll be asked to show government issued identification if you're, I guess, not a student. That's the south side of the library. Here's the west side, looking east at the library, and then the looking west direction from these steps here to the quad. Here was waiting on a bench. Not a great resolution, but crane moving back and forth and just bisecting the moon. A lot of interesting geometry here. I didn't see the tensegrity sculpture by Snelson, so not sure about that one. Here's the window where I did my 5 years of PhD in Professor Deborah Gordon's lab from 2014 to 2019. And this was a construction operation where Heron Hall and that area used to be. Beautiful lake log. Morning walk with Jakob, hanging out, going around. Okay, that's kind of getting into the Stanford zone. Onto the library and special collections room. So on the west side of the building, up the staircase, and then back around through either the left or the right turn to get to the special collection. So it was actually visible. It's the second story here. These shades came down. It was extremely dramatic. People were filming it. All right, a lot to say here. So we had fascinating, multifaceted conversations with the helpful staff at the special collections. They are kind, and since researchers are only allowed a single box at a time, we got up and spoke to them a lot. You walk up to a desk right here and trade the materials in. And also, we had a serendipitous sight, and it reminded me of meeting with Robert Trujillo in 2017, but never seeing the materials while I was in grad school. The staff know many of the Chronofile researchers and authors from their repeated visits. They especially mentioned the influence and knowledge of Bonnie DeVarco and several other authors and visitors, including like books that we've discussed in TrimTab, the authors of them, and also either people who brought objects or helped them build objects. So here was one, tensegrity. Maybe that's the one that was over on the other side of the grass. Here's more of the foldable, clippable. Apparently, the Chronofile researchers are relatively frequent. It is one of the, quote, more popular collections, possibly in the top 10. And they are arriving on the timescale of 2 to 3 weeks. So this is at the entrance looking in, desk on the left, and then we were working off to the right. Maurice chillin'. It is acceptable to talk and commiserate within the room respectfully and quietly, but more rules will be described later. There's the sign in. All right. So on to the there that's there and not there. The reading of the Chronofile. So here I kind of started to step into that, like, well, what can I share about reading of the Chronofile? We are awaiting approval from the Buckminster Fuller estate. I'm just going off of my current understanding, but I'm not proceeding past the current writing just because of the desire to like learn more about what the privileging is. It's something that as will also be explored in the kind of connections at the end. It's a very complex collection, as many physical as well as digital collections are. So the totality of that, there's so much interesting about it. But essentially, I'm not going to share any pictures of the photographs that were taken of materials, but I hope there'll be some interesting and funny parts nonetheless. But I'll update / make Livestream 19.2 if/when we figure that out. All right. Backpacks in the locker. Locker 17. Not shown. Exchange the key for the locker for them holding on to the ID again. Only pencils allowed in the space. No pens, no notebooks. Here was a camera, trusty battery pack. So everything that is photographed from a content perspective is written down in terms of the box and series and the folder, and then the content. So I made overall notes, but it was not documented at the per photograph level. Just we looked through hundreds or like low thousands of things. So it's just like a lot of seeing it. And most material are in these 6-inch boxes, of which there's like about 2,400 of. Here's the page, separator, foam, rest. Book weight's not shown. 6-inch book, collection 1090, they all were. Series 2, box 145. look it up on the Stanford website, what it is, for example. All the materials kind of laid out, bring the box in, Maurice doing the active flipping, and both of us kind of looking for things that we were excited to see. I guess some of which each of us have just written / said about, but just like always then open like, well, what is going to be the next letter? Like, oh no. Okay, newspaper clipping. Is it going to be like an epic newspaper section, or just inscrutable, or what? And then also the continuum of basically like published, unpublished, or available to non-available. And then people's specific interest, like just laughing and thinking, oh, you know, this person will enjoy that. Okay, mostly in boxes. We also had several items in these large map folders. Maurice next to this piece, which is one that will come up at the end of this writing, which is the one about time, exquisite light, and lightful 4D. Here standing on a stool, taking probably like the smaller one, the 4D kind of around the clock one, lightful, is its own single. Here's the materials that were photographed. Columns are box, series, folder, item. I don't know if, since the materials are not digitized, how easy it is to just say letters, but perhaps it could have been specified at a per picture level. But this is just like going and just having fun, seeing what was happening there, and just seeing what was interesting, how to continue to think about this. It'll come back. We must communicate and receive approval from the copyright holder to have a usage more broader than personal. Like, honestly, in light of the restrictions, it was very generous, I think, to even have open-ended access. We hope this will be possible for the pictures that we took, while also recognizing the complexity of the situation. Like, just to give a very, very, very partial from just a given Dymaxion related section, even on one topic, it would have bills, personal letters, information, addresses, etc., contracts, correspondences, sometimes one way, sometimes two ways, sometimes clipped together with a pin or stapled, different sizes, sometimes carbon copies, then that would be like spread across time. Photographs and negatives, clippings from newspapers, and also entire magazine issues, like including the very interesting development of the T-square / shelter architecture. It was like, I just didn't have any familiarity that this was a whole connection. Someone suggested it, I think Lionel, to Maurice to select on, and then it was this whole interesting, like, photographing the tables of contents. Maybe those are available. However, just speaking to the complexity of the rights and access, because it's materials that, on one hand, one person might have the sole rights to, like living person, not living person, very, very, very piece by piece, maybe requiring like multiple pieces of context. So it's a complex problem, but just thinking about it's kind of cool for the fuller. Okay, so as above, I cannot directly post any direct photographs without more approval. So humorously, though, quite actually, I'll provide material such as this. Here's Maurice looking at a document. Here's an object, but aren't they all kind of, that is within a box, smaller, basically on the same size, a little bit, pencil's a little smaller than a hand. Here's some redacted photographs, 2 Mylar enclosed sheets with 3 each. And if you don't take them out of the Mylar, you don't need to wear gloves. If you do touch the photo, I believe that you need to wear gloves, which they provide, as with the pencils. And here's another document or object. All right, so just to sort of get to the end, then see if anyone has a thought or question to get it in before the week ends. So what are some ongoing questions, discussion / inquiry? One ongoing direction. Let's see, check the email. 17 minutes, no response. Discuss with Trim Tab people and mailing list on this Coda. People could write comments, or who knows, it's editable or commentable. Yeah, how do we get approval to share materials related to this question of which material should we ask for sharing from our visits versus / and another approach with thinking, yeah, other than this visit entirely, what materials are most useful and why? We just ad hoc did it. How could we utilize future visits, whether they're more ad hoc or using some structured or coordinated approach? I believe that the several hundred pictures that I took are relatively good. I used a medium quality 70 megapixels, at least advertised as, autofocus point and shoot camera. Also waterproof. Those pictures, just from looking at them like on the display, they were good enough for OCR, optical character recognition, for certain document types. Like you could imagine letters and other kinds of potentially handwritten documents. And then there's also like a lot of more just assembly materials. And so maybe something more image input could be interesting. How could the digital accessibility and the living relevance of the overall Fuller archive, Fuller Shell 1, be activated and related better by / through those who ever knew Fuller in person, Fuller Shell 2, a lot of the elders on the Trim Tab mailing group and elsewhere, in light of other later and broader generations' work and context, Fuller Shell 3. So that was one very interesting topic, discussing with Maurice and other people, and just whether this exact nomenclature, I know there's maybe another sense I've heard people like use these different things. So just kind of loosely describing the overlapping intervals and the generic, also Fuller specific elements of that kind of continuity and stewardship. Pretty interesting. So how can we connect and learn from / with / among archiving projects? So that's like the collection itself at Stanford, as well as Rob Young's Systems Community Alliance work, as well as archive-aware and archive-proactive projects. So here possibly including Bucky Fuller Institute, the McLuhan Institute, based upon several fascinating correspondences between Marshall McLuhan and Fuller, Maurice alluded to, and other communities, Active Inference Institute, and so on. Math for Wisdom. Another question, how can we deepen our understanding with the current materials and infrastructure that we have digitally, as we'll look at in a second, while also thinking about future and alternative methods? So to make the above point and also relate to the first piece that we looked at in the day, which was the Lightful 4D, I was able to leverage the amazing Buckyverse resource, this URL here, to search for a few words I remembered from the image. It was like, okay, I'm like 100% sure I have seen it. I don't know, presentation, maybe a book, I don't know. And this is like a relatively well-known image. And the long tail, of course, is extreme. So I was able to type into the Buckyverse resource just some of the terms that I remembered, even from the limited coverage. This is just incredible work by Brett E. on the trim tab group, and others too. But just searching for like a few words I remembered, one could imagine possibly alternatively different quotes or entities in different correspondences, or like a number, like what can you do with seeing a number or a ratio. And then just like jump around to other fuller artifacts, other books where the same term or a different term, or it comes up differently, like looking at list ordering, inclusion, exclusion on lists. So searching like relatively many times on Google, Perplexity, using dispatched LLMs, and the Stanford like site, etc. Even with exact searching text, I was sure this is like a common-ish image. This is the main text along the edges of this image. And I just was not finding it. I don't know what the copyright status, I'm not even showing it because it's like, could I? But it's not possible. But here was just a quote that came up in the Bucky verse. So to kind of like get to the end here, but read this incredible quote and then kind of like why I chose that quote. Balancing what it could mean with how long it would take according to free energy minimization. I just want to show this quote because it is kind of like a microcosm, as so much of it was, with learning and applying, for example, Bucky Fuller's work, and just all these other areas. So I'll see if anyone writes a question, but I'm going to read this quotation, which is from Starting with Universe. And then I'll see if there's any questions. But here was the cool quote. That just searching a term was like the very low throughput, maybe the right in certain ways, but just saying the low throughput approach to hopping, pole jumping across different terms. There could be fuzzy semantic search, but entities, causal analysis, all these kinds of things. But this was just like typing in the syntax match to find that the description of the image that I wanted described. But I was like, okay, I can look at the photo and describe it. Maybe that would be interesting. But I don't want to just get into, I just don't remember what it said, or I actually could look at the image, but I just want to finish this by the end of the day. So here was the quote from the book. Outside the bands, concentric circle bands, are a baby, a church, a heart, and the sun. And finally, the texts at the edge. Time, metal, mechanics. Time, exquisite light. Time, slow matter. Time, fellowship, production. 4 edges. The array appears like so many imaginary objects of desire, free-floating without a system of connections yet to bring them into a coherent structure, except, of course, the earth itself, in the center of the kind of mandala. By thinking a multiplicity of elements held in one world of 4 dimensions, hashtag 4D, Fuller is beginning to conceptualize that system in terms of movements, distances, patterns, and intensity, in an abstract diagram I will call geological. By geological, I don't mean just soil and gemstones, of course, but rather a logic or system that is centered on the Earth as an environment and a planet in a cosmos. At first, Fuller titled the system 4D. Add that one to the dictionary. Though many other names would follow. And I think as Kirby Erner has demonstrated, there's many other uses for the 4D namespace too. So it's both ways in how it's both ways. Fuller's naming, as we know, was prolificate, profligate. Perhaps overnaming is a necessary byproduct of geological thinking, which is holistic, even totalizing. Empiricist, but also transcendentalist, Fuller family, Margaret Fuller, technocratic and metaphysical. Such contradictions issue neologisms as stabilizers. Very Scott David. And as Fuller develops lightful, which is big on that image, like around the clock, it's like the letters say lightful. Yet it's not ultra developed out syntactically later. However, continuing with the quote, as Fuller develops lightful into 4D, 4D into Dymaxion, and Dymaxion into geodesics and synergetics, the geometry of thought itself
work with Applewhite. His geological diagram engages architecture in ways that are fruitful for rethinking both the architectural history of the present and Fuller's own trajectory. Bringing in Spaceship Earth, all these other kinds of memes, themes, narratives, fun, Fuller related, and also more first principles / tangible. So as the, I think, note at the beginning, which is basically where I'll leave it, unless there's any questions here for now. Whether or not visiting the archives, they are there, / it was the trace of how it was, partial trace, etc. Stigmergy, niche modification, also really exciting work from Elliot that I just, Hauser, who I just saw mention it on the Institute Discord about the quantum document and how to think about that quantum element. I'm not sure it's just very interesting and was just a few hours ago. So yeah, the material, the non-fungibility of the material is there, whether one is there or not. So, what then is the actual primary sensory confirmation? Thinking about like what we see in terms of our generative model and so on, like what is happening when it is seen. And then this is a topic across kind of sub niches in the Fuller area, is kind of alluded to with that multi-shell, but there's probably just many other ways to think about it. What is the person themselves? What are the topics? And like close packing of spheres, a lot of the axioms and even justifiable choices in Synergetics, it doesn't require any contact with the Chronofile, period. It's like the history on that, partial traces of the history of that, and then the focus on weaponry to livingery and artifacts and engineering, all these kinds of things that Fuller's life was. There was a focus on improving the broader well-being and quality of living, possibility of living through the anticipatory design science. So the physical, productive, material design, comprehensive design, topics and documents that made us think of Kurt and others, and this comprehensive design through not even assuming that the Chronofile is proportionate or complete at all, it was certainly, probably constantly, fully active on his theoretical considerations, back to school days, if you believe him, or certainly later, as well as the substance struggle and the business and communications and kind of incredible analogous publication / paper behavior, like reprinting in different journal volumes, same journal, copying, sending people copies, and getting lists of people to whom to send copies printed of the work for. I mean, just so many other things that immediately and on reflection just give their own kind of like primary interest, because even in an archiving related meeting earlier this day, so this is the microcosm component, it's like, what good are these systems / Fuller / etc. archives? And so it's interesting with the hands-on to see what technical and semantic value is there. That evaluation always is like through time. It's like, well, couldn't in the future somebody, so even the kind of pragmatic, like, let's think about it that way, it's bounded by the unknown, of course. But okay, putting that aside, so then there's thinking about it, maybe even most information theoretically, like what new information is this adding, or how is this updating our trained model, Bayesian surprise concept. But if the data set can be like exactly procedurally or statistically generated, so like the synthetic and the real are one and the same, then maybe the generator instructions or compressions are simpler. None such for physical materials. So then separating this, what Fuller referred to as metaphysical, so like the parts that have a symbolic, what is in the nexus of geometry of nature, geometry of thinking, etc. That is very, I think, alive and relevant for ongoing discussions, even earlier today with Darius and Ian McGilchrist on the physical and the metaphysical, even during the roundtable. John's question to JF about what is symbolic, about symbolic active inference. So it's always too much to know / do. And that's this sort of unity's plural minimum 2 element in Fuller and William Blake's work and others. Dean's work. In that is the kind of co-experienced complementarity with the material experience, and then whatever that cleaves off. Maybe nothing to cleave off in certain conceptions, maybe more to cleave off. So overall, pretty fun and interesting. Yeah, I think the best way to continue, depending on when someone is interested to like learn or contribute more for learning and information foraging, the video description / starting on the trim tab Coda, which is not heavily saturated in any way. Explore that, play around there, make your own Coda documents, and then also explore some other linked resources here. Get in touch. And it's going to be a long and interesting experience and reality to have this kind of portal with Aldous and Fuller. And that's kind of what, again, that's what the Chronofile is. And then in its own clarification of the physicality and the metaphysicality, it's its own bundle of experience. Upcycle Club wrote, it was a really great talk between Darius and Dr. Ian McGilchrist. Thank you, Upcycle. All right. Looking forward to where it goes on the trim tab. Now, closer to 1 hour ago, but not quite 1 hour ago. More like 38 minutes ago. But looking forward to where that goes on the mailing list / how we continue to learn Fuller and everything else. So, all right. Thank you. Bye.